Hello, everyone. I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to Global Express. It's where we take a close look at events in our backyard that directly impact India. This week, it's the much hyped meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Kazan, the capital of Russia's colorful Tatarstan at the BRICS summit, hosted by Russian President Vladimir Putin in Kazan, with over 32 countries participating. That's the one that's grabbed our attention. The Modi-Xi meet, the first in 5 years, the first after the Galwan clash in 2020, has become a huge talking point. It's overshadowed much of what else happened at the BRICS summit, including the membership of Iran and the United Arab Emirates, and Russia's Putin and Xi and China's Xi crafting a major challenge to the US and the West. But here's the thing: just like Kazan didn't actually get to the heart of how the global South or BRICS was going to challenge the world order, not getting down to the nitty gritty of de-dollarization. The meeting between Xi and Modi was equally, there were many questions that remain even afterwards. I mean, will it lead to a standoff easing, as the Indian Army chief has said, on the very tense border? Will it lead to disengagement? So Prime Minister Modi has said mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual sensitivity should continue to be the basis of our relations, when the Galwan clash was actually a demonstration of mutual distrust. I mean, it ended the peace and tranquility agreements. The only glimmer of hope, President Xi, as our foreign ministry says, is his promise that special representatives of the two governments will meet shortly to resolve the India-China boundary question. What exactly that means, of course, it will be come to pass, I think, in the next revealed in the weeks to come. Talking to us today, our Ambassador KP Fabian, host to Austria, Iran, Sri Lanka, and Canada, and the UN. He saw the Iranian Revolution firsthand. He was the Joint Secretary coordinating the evacuation of over 176,000 Indian nationals from Iraq and Kuwait in 1991. I saw you in action, Ambassador. He's also the author of 2 books. Welcome to the show. Welcome Lt Gen PJS Pannu, who commanded the Leh-based 14 Corps, which operates along the China border. General Pannu has served a number of tenures along the line of actual control, and he can tell us how this will all pan out, I'm sure. Welcome, General.
Thank you.
And welcome to a key China expert, Manoj Kewalramani. He's a fellow China Studies and chairperson of the Indo-Pacific Studies program at the Takshashila Institution. He's also senior associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in the US and an expert on Quad. Welcome, Manoj.
Thank you so much.
Let me also welcome Nivedita Kapoor, who's an India expert in Russia foreign policy based in Moscow, who can unpack Russia's role in India's strategy and what China-Russia partnership actually means for Delhi, and of course with the war in Ukraine. And she will join us in a little while. Let me start with you, General Pannu, because the military standoff on the ground is at the heart of this mistrust between India and China. So both 1993 and 1996 peace and tranquility agreements have stood for nothing because India and Chinese troops clashed in Galwan in 2020. Could you actually tell us or tell our viewers what actually happened in 2022? Because we have millions of pictures showing Indian and Chinese troops shoving each other. But was the People's Liberation Army planning to occupy Galwan? And then it came up against the Indian Army, or was it just an accident?
Neena, thank you very much for bringing up this question. Between India and China, of course, it is known that both countries are growing at the considerable rate, and China has, of course, surpassed the growth rates. It is also industrial hub of the world, and as far as the military industrial complex goes, there is so much of hardware which is not only the analog but also digital and autonomous hardware which they are churning out and exporting to a larger part of the world. And the concern is also our neighborhood gets a huge amount of Chinese military hardware. So therefore,
on that day in 2020,
I'm coming. I'm coming there. So what has been happening over a period of time is that after 1962 war, for 2 or 3 decades, there was nothing much that happened. But in 1986, it is Somdurongchu again, which erupted. Of course,
Mm.
in 75, there was a clash at Turungla. But well, that was one of those events. But in Somdurongchu, they came and occupied sizable amount of territory very close to Tawang. And again, the patrolling activity was such that the Chinese were not very close to the line of actual control, but they would come at will and occupy certain areas or carry out patrolling in a manner which would be very offensive, as we call it a salami slicing strategy.
Yeah.
Um, as far as 62 war is concerned, well, we all know that 62 war was largely fought in the eastern Ladakh and also at that time Nefa, which is now Arunachal Pradesh. Uh, Now that you have asked a question on Galwan, which is part of the eastern Ladakh, in 1962, even Galwan was one place which the one of our battalions was located, 5 Jat, and they fought a very fierce battle.
I
No,
see.
yes, fierce battle
It
was
has a
fought.
history.
Yeah, 1962, Galwan had one of the battalions called 5 Jat, and they fought a very fierce battle there. But over a period of time, when we talk about where all the battles were fought, they were fought in DBO, they were fought in Sasoma, Galwan, Hot Spring, Sirja, Chishul, Razangla, and also at Demchok. So these are the areas in eastern Ladakh where in 1962 the Chinese troops had actually attacked. And as a result,
Did they take land? Did they actually take over the land?
they took over certain land because area which was hurriedly occupied by the Indian forces at that time, because uh, we had deployed our forces only after learning that the Chinese have built a highway uh, through the Exai Chin area. We did not have
Mm.
any idea earlier, because as we became independent, it was taken for granted that how the British left those territories. Of course, British were also quite undecided. Sometimes they would mark a line here and there. But at the end of it, based on what the British gave the perception to the Indian government, they made a line which includes the entire Siachen Glacier, so at the entire Exai Chin. So as a result, we to discover that there was a road built, and the Chinese troops were, of course, there. They had to protect, and there were clashes on the border whenever our patrol, the police posts were there, and whenever our troops went there, there used to be a pushback. So hurriedly, military was deployed in certain areas, sometimes even behind where the Chinese were. So wherever the Indian troops would go, they would establish posts, and wherever the Chinese caught us, they started a pushback, and that is how, in 2 phases, 1962 war was fought. One was from 18th to 27th October 62, and second phase was from 18th to 21st November. There was a logistic pause in between, and I suppose they also expected that a lot of diplomatic and military diplomacy would happen. Whether it happened, how much it happened, is another point altogether. But how the war stopped was that the Chinese at some point decided to pull back on their own. They had almost reached Tawang, encircled Tawang, and went surpassed Tawang and continued to go towards Bombdila. And they actually came to certain areas which were overlooking Assam. And that is where our prime minister at that time says, "My heart goes to the people of Assam." It means that we had actually lost the territory which we were holding as far as the
Yeah.
Nepal is concerned. Now,
And to get back to
yeah.
what happened in 2020.
Now, why I'm building all this for you is that when the Chinese all of a sudden left, they all decided that wherever the troops were at that time, they would pull back 20 kilometers from that point where they
I
had reached.
see. I
And
see.
the uh, line of perception that was meant to be understood by both became the line of actual control. And of course,
Mm.
such lines were drawn even, by Chauvelai, and those, certain diplomatic letters are there. But those lines are not marked on ground. They were only marked on the map. So it's very difficult to put the decisions on the map on ground. So therefore, the soldiers have to discover the tactical features which they must occupy to defend that area. So over a period of time, the troops have to find their domination and from where they can protect the lines which are there on the map. So sometimes they are ill-conceived from the other person's perspective, and it gives a lot of discomfort to the opponent. So the push and pull strategy, which now we call it salami slicing, it had to be resorted to because both sides, the infrastructure like G213 is a Western highway which they created. Now, to say that you get out and leave the Western highway obviously was a very tall order because it connected the Xinjiang in the north, and ultimately now the same area is connected with the Pakistan economic corridor. Now,
That's right, General. Yeah.
anytime the forces build infrastructure in that area, there is a pushback that comes from the Chinese. So
So
this
that's
is
what
where
happened that day.
this is what they were doing, that they were being intrusive because Indians were building infrastructure, and we were also saying, politically, sometimes what happens internally, there is a political kind of a thing, whether we should take Pakistan occupied Kashmir on, or we should take Aksai Chin. So of course, internal noises are that we should take Aksai Chin. So obviously that worries also the opponent. So with all the historical references which I have given, the passes which dominate, which protect their Western highway, is the areas which are very sensitive to them, and they did not want the Indians to build infrastructure, and that is where there was a pushback which was coming from Chinese with collective statements, and the infrastructure and the militarization which was as it is happening, which the Indian troops were doing. So Galwan happened, which actually could have happened elsewhere because Galwan area is not the place where there was a differing perception. There are places elsewhere that there were clashes in 2013 and 2014. That those were the areas of differing perception, but not Galwan. Galwan only happened because we were building infrastructure, and they wanted also a push back there. So that is a new
That
area,
that's
and the
good.
clash happened. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that was
I
the
hear that.
background
I
to
hear
it.
that. Manoj, if I can just come to you, will you just add to this? I mean, because the perception that we all have is that it was, the Indian troops were pushing back when the Chinese were, coming in. And then that led to the clash, and the Chinese have broken, with past practice and basically did not inform the Indian army that they were patrolling the area, which is what I believe they normally used to do. Uh, do you have anything to add to that? And of course, we're now talking about buffer zones also. One hears that some of these Chinese buffer zones are in what India sees as its territory, as the general said. None of it is on a map. It's all on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. So I agree with the general. I think he's laid it out very well that, when he said that Galwan is not a place where we had differences in perception, which tell you that there was transgression where they were trying to push back. So they did cross whatever our customary lines were in terms of how the troops used to access. And they were trying to stall India's infrastructure development in those areas. And that led to essentially the clash that eventually happened. And the clash happened while we'd agreed on a certain amount of disengagement and there was verification going on. So there was an element of things happening on the ground on the day. But I think that the fact that this was thought in terms of pushing back at India's infrastructural development and stymieing it, that I think that is also, I agree, one of the best case assessments of what the Chinese wanted. And even Chinese foreign ministry statements indicate that. They did talk about India's infrastructure development. On the broader issue of, whether the Chinese were coming in, yes, they were clearly coming in. They were clearly trying to change the status quo on the ground. The buffer zones that we have right now as part of this agreement that was announced earlier this week, it's clear that there are buffer zones that exist in Pangong So, in Gogra Hot Springs, and in Galwan, and those have not been renegotiated. The foreign secretary was quite clear in Kazan during his second briefing last night, where he said that the agreements arrived at, the last agreement on disengagement was arrived at in September 2022. And those old agreements
Yeah.
were opened as this part of the discussion. And the current patrolling rights and grazing rights deal applies to Depsang and Demchok, which were the two issues which had been unresolved. So that is where we are right now. So in that sense, yes, both India has obviously lost access to some of the territory that it had access to in the past as part of the buffer zone. I would, while acknowledging that, I think I would also put a note of caution in there, saying this is a process which I don't think is necessarily completed. I can understand where people might assume that this is now the new status quo and it's likely to remain. Perhaps it will, but I would not want to prejudge that. So yes,
Yeah.
is that we have buffer zones right
That's
now.
very interesting. Ambassador Fabian, if I can come to you, there are all the experts who've been on various talking points have raised this issue of how this is just a very, very preliminary kind of arrangement, that the actual nitty-gritty will come with talks. Now, there have been 21 rounds of talks which China and the Indian Army, the armies have had, and the diplomats have met. Do you think that diplomacy could actually, force China's hand in any way, or are we dealing with, the inscrutable Chinese? We don't know where this is going to go, because I mean, you still have, it's still very likely that we could have talks, but no actual conclusion reached in round after round. You have to let Nivedita in. Yeah. No, but she hasn't unmuted herself. Yeah. Sorry.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, Ambassador, your turn. Yes.
Thank you, Neena. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
And also through you with hundreds of thousands of your listeners.
Likewise.
And to my fellow listeners, because I always listen to Global Express. Now, coming to this matter, you were referring to Galwan, and most of the commentators in the media too have referred to Galwan. That was 2020?
20.
Okay. Can we go back 3 years more? 2017. You remember Doklam?
Yes.
And there too, a settlement was announced, if I remember right, about 6 or 7 days before a BRICS summit, which Xi Jinping was chairing, and Prime Minister Modi attended. In other
Yes,
words,
that's right.
the settlement was announced, a few days in advance of the summit. Now, this one was announced, I suppose, 2 or 3 days in advance. You can calculate. So there is a relationship.
There's a pattern, you're saying,
Okay. Now,
the way the Chinese operate.
yeah. Now, your question whether diplomacy can handle the matter and get it resolved to our satisfaction, my answer is no. Were I a Chinese diplomat, I would have preferred to keep this matter pending, because it is in my national interest to ensure that anytime I like, I can needle India. You see? And India is the only country that stands in the way of meaning Chinese, sort of, emerging as a sole leader of Asia. And I want to first co-equal with the United States and later overtake it. Okay? So India, to an extent, stands in the way, and it is in my interest not to settle this.
That's a very interesting point, Ambassador. I'm sure Manoj Kewalramani is dying to jump in and say something. Meanwhile, welcome, Nivedita. I'm so glad you joined. I'll come back to you in the next round on Russia. Yeah,
Glad to
Manoj,
be
what do
here.
you have to say?
Thanks.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that on the broader boundary issue, I don't think there is any hurry in China to resolve this issue. If you even look at the statements that were issued after this meeting by both sides, the readouts, you will see that the Indian side talks about having the special representative talks at an early date. The Chinese side just says that we will have these talks. They don't sort of even put a vague time frame to it. If you read the Indian readout, it talks about the goal of having predictable, stable, and amicable relations. The goal is to create a multipolar Asia and multipolar world. The Chinese side doesn't talk about a multipolar Asia at all. So I completely agree that there is no interest in China to arrive at a resolution to this issue. In terms of rebalancing the relationship, I think there is an interest in China to do that at present. That's for various reasons. I mean, if you look at the world from Beijing, it's quite a difficult and hostile world. It's got the United States with whom it's locked in strategic competition for the long term. There's an election that's supposed to take place in which the options for Beijing are essentially bad and worse. And there's not really, domestically, the economy is struggling. The rebalance domestically in terms of the economy has been really difficult. Right? So I think that there are reasons for Beijing to arrive at some sort of a tactical reboot with India, but I don't think that means that the strategic direction of China's policy shifts. And I think we in India need to be cognizant of that. The only last point that I will add to this is that it is really important for us in India to have a discussion about what sort of a relationship do we want with China, and the current asymmetry in our power, and given our current economic and political needs, how do we arrive at that relationship? We understand what the Chinese want, but what do we want? And how, given all these limitations, are we going to arrive at that? And for that, I think diplomacy is essential.
That's very interesting. I'll come back to you on the economy and our debt and so on and so forth, and how we've blocked all these imports from China. But I'll just come back to you, General Panu. You know, I read a little line about the People's Liberation Army's rocket force, which it's called the former Second Artillery Corps. It is the nuclear armed strategic and tactical missile force of the People's Republic of China, I believe, and it's deployed on our border. Do we have a counter? I mean, anything close? I mean, and the other question I have is, we've always been able to read Pakistan because we understand Pakistan and what makes it tick. But the Chinese People's Liberation Army has had, I mean, in the sense Xi Jinping seems to have replaced the head of the Western Command. He's replaced the head of the Eastern Command. Should we read anything into that? I mean, in fact, is he tightening his control over the PLA, or was he losing, or was he getting nervous about the people who handled the India border?
Firstly, regarding the rocket force, both countries have a similar kind of forces. We have the strategic forces, and the Agni series are quite potent. We also have the nuclear capable missiles, which can go up to 5,000 to 6,000 kilometers proven. And of course, with various capabilities and the nuclear warheads, of course, there is a checkmate on that. You can keep adding number of nuclear warheads, that doesn't count much because the impact is so devastating that it is only meant for deterrence and not for use. Because once you start using it, I think it will be an all fall down situation. So I think there is a checkmate on that. As far as the China control of Xi Jinping is concerned, it is very interesting that he is the political head, that is political party head. He is the government head, he is the executive head. He is also the head of the military. He is head of the CMC. So there is nothing that can happen politically, diplomatically, militarily, because they have one common head. So one person can plan everything. They're so well coordinated, whether it is called the Western theater or whatever theater you can call it, or strategic force or nuclear force or whatever you say, information warfare. It all actually comes down to the executive control by one person. Not that in India, our prime minister is not in control, but the fact of the matter is that India seems to be more jointed in taking actions from the political to diplomatic to military, because we seem to be more jointed. Now, look at a situation in 2014. We had their premier visiting India, Xi Jinping visiting India, and he's sitting in Ahmedabad. While he's there, the Chinese PLA forces are pushing themselves in Chumar.
Yeah.
Now, why would the head of the state, who has a control of the military, the political party, and the executive, not be able to handle something that the military is doing on ground? So therefore, the Chinese way of doing things is to confuse India to a point that we do not know what we are dealing with.
Oh, that's very interesting.
And they will control the tempers, they will control the situation, and they will bring down the whole thing. As the ambassador was saying, that now you want to go to BRICS and then you want to shake hands there, you might as well then tone down the whole thing and make it look more conducive. It doesn't mean that it's become conducive. It also encourages India to take a step back. And they will continue to make sure that military takes a step back first, as we did south of Pegongso, post Galwan. And over years, as into 20, the whole thing started in 2021, 22. We said, yes, there is a pullback, and we created buffer zones. But the point is that when we had gone onto certain heights south of Pagong So, those heights, the Kailash heights, were most important for us because that had actually caught the goat of the Chinese military. To have made Chinese agree to every single point, that should have been the last step back. But in between, for whatever reasons, we took that step, and that was a release in which what we wanted to achieve, they continue till date to stay at the area which is Depsang and Depsang Bulge and Bottleneck. They are still there. They are also in Demchok. They took very long to pull back from Gogra and Hot Spring. Galwan was one of the first ones to settle for the simple reason because that was the main flashpoint, and that had to be settled. So over a period of time, if you really see, the large territory which is not accessible to the Indian troops is at Depsang. And a lot of people do not understand the territory that Depsang is in two parts. Some people call it Depsang Plains, but that is only the northern portion which is plains. The southern portion is absolutely broken ground, and the infantry has to do foot patrolling in that area. Not even any other vehicle can go because the bottleneck is so narrow that only infantry or a single person can pass through one at a time. And they have blocked it. So if they have blocked it, so between the PP10 to 13, the Indian troops have not been able to access the territory ever since 2020 happened. Now that they are talking about that they will settle the matter and we will be able to create more protocols of patrolling where neither of us go, it means would they actually leave Bottleneck and go back to where they were before 2020? It's a question mark. And if they go back and if there are new protocols which are to be written, obviously it means the protocols which started in 1993, 96 and 2003, 14, it means all those protocols will have to be either rewritten or read differently.
That's very interesting.
Anything new that gets added leaves the first documents or first understanding to be seen from a different prism altogether. Yeah. And secondly, with many protocols which were actually not adhered to by the Chinese, when Chinese give a hand, you don't know whether they're shaking your hand or squeezing your hand. I think,
okay.
So, when they shake hand, you don't know whether it is shake hand or it is arm twisting, because it can be very similar. And when dealing with the Chinese, when the Chinese are smiling, it means they have a design, a nefarious design. And when Chinese are very angry, it means they're going to lose something. So that is how they become very aggressive. It means they were not prepared for something. So I think the dislocation between political, diplomatic, and military actions and what they say and what they do is a very purposeful design. And that is the three warfare strategy that China adopts. And I think that is going to be at play still.
Ambassador, I'll come to you on this same topic, but Manoj doesn't have much time. Manoj, could you tell us whether there was huge pressure on India as well to reverse the block that we had set up on Chinese access to Indian markets? Because post Galwan, the ban on Chinese apps cost China $10 billion, but it didn't work to India's advantage either, because there was a huge trade deficit that we built up. Am I correct? I mean, becoming strong trade partners is what I believe China wants, given its economy, sort of hitting a big road bump, really, with its, real estate issues and high unemployment rates and its aging population. So is China important to India's supply chain, or is India important to China's economic sort of upturn?
Yeah. Okay. Before I get to the economy, I just want to, as much as I agree with the general's argument, I also think that we tend to overestimate this unanimity in Chinese policymaking. Just look at how China has dealt with the United States. after the balloon incidents with the United States and then subsequent dealing with the United States shows that there is also dissonance within that policy-making ecosystem. So I
No,
think
in the sense, you're saying that the balloon incident was
look, to assume that just before Blinken was supposed to travel, there was this big spy balloon that was sent, and there are these spy balloons roaming around the world, and then that was part of strategy, is giving too much credit to Beijing. I mean, I think it is important for us to keep in mind that the Chinese are also people. Xi Jinping is a man. He puts on his pants one leg at a time, like the rest of us do. So they also have the same sort of dissonance within policy making that other countries have. So that is one thing that I just want to put on the table. On the issue of the economy, look, $10 million is seriously chump change. Also, $10 million is not for China. It's for the private companies that were creating these apps. And it's not significant in that sense. In terms of the broader economic relationship, I don't think that the trade between India and China is significant enough in terms of quantity and volume that it will affect China economically, that it will hurt them economically, right? So taking restrictive trade measures, particularly on products that the Indian industry needs to boost our manufacturing capacity, to boost our exports, and possibly to build technology capacity, is somewhere self-defeating. So I am not terribly disappointed
So
that.
you're saying basically that it's not the economy or a boost in the economic ties that China is looking at, really.
No, I'm saying that they do. Of course, they do want. They do want access to the Indian market. Of course, they do want investments in India, and of course, they do want, particularly if those investments come with purchase of assets, if they come with strategic inroads in key sectors. Of course, they want that. What I'm saying is that from an Indian point of view, trade with China, particularly the kind that we have right now, which supports our economic growth, which supports our consumer welfare, and which supports our exports, is not a bad thing. We should not be necessarily dissing it. On investments, my view is that our approach to China needs to be driven from a lens of security. That does not mean that we need to cast a very high net. That means that we internally need to sit and decide which are the key sectors and what are the kinds of investments that are a no-go for us. We need to think about that very smartly. We need to devise an investment scrutiny architecture, which is not ad hoc. Currently, what we have is an ad hoc process of approval, which honestly is completely non-transparent. We need to have a fairly transparent, and I agree that there are limits to the transparency that it can have, but there must be some degree of transparency, some degree of predictability for industry, and we need to have some sort of a process where we approve investments in non-critical sectors. For that,
So,
we need to
would you
define
say
non-critical sectors.
would you say that car makers like BYD and Great Wall Motors are critical or non-critical because we banned them?
To me, they are non-critical. When we can have an MG deal with JSW, which was approved earlier this year, to me, the auto sector is a domain which is largely non-critical. In smart cars, is your data an issue? Yes, but for that, you need to have data regulation, right? So I think we need to think of this in a far more nuanced way than just saying no to Chinese capital. It's also worth thinking a lot of Chinese companies have partnerships with European companies. A lot of Chinese companies have ownerships in German auto companies, and German auto companies sell in India and manufacture. So I think we need to think a little bit more deeply about these issues rather than just saying if it's Chinese, it's no. And currently, my challenge with the current investment scrutiny model that we have with Press Note 3 that was issued is that it's non-transparent, and it's the way the approvals are happening are very ad hoc. We need to have a much more systematic process. But to do that, we need to first define what's critical, what's not critical. And that's the exercise that government and people like us in think tanks should be doing.
That's very interesting. Ambassador Fabian, do you agree with Manoj? I mean, I also feel that there's a move by China. It has a strategic reasons for reaching out to India in the way it has. Because in many ways, I think the challenge that it has is greater in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, where US's new allies, the Philippines and Vietnam, are thwarting China in many ways on Taiwan. And I mean, all these years it's used Pakistan as a proxy to destabilize India. It's been stepped up that as well. But has India managed to, sort of to bring China's, attention to the fact that a hot border in the north and its east, or to China's south and in the maritime sphere, is not going to work to its advantage? Is that what's driven Xi Jinping to give this a second look?
Okay, so your argument, as you put it, is that economic considerations played a major role in China's current stance vis-a-vis India? Well, it certainly the economic considerations are there, but I doubt whether they played a major role. And in the current case, I think we should also take into account the possibility that President Putin nudged both Xi Jinping and Modi to at least, when you come for the summit, don't look daggers at each other, you know?
He didn't want what happened in
Yeah,
Johannesburg and
basically,
Astana to be
that is
repeated.
point number one. Point number
Yeah.
two is that it would not have been good for Xi Jinping if he had not met Modi, because then in China, the story would have gone round that India refused to meet him. And the third point is that you must have noticed it was a handshake and not a hug.
Absolutely. That's downright funny. Yeah. Yeah. So before I let you go, Manoj, could you sum up for us whether it's the strategic shift sorry, this makes me laugh quite a bit. Whether it's a strategic shift by China as a calculated move, or what exactly was it all about?
I say this as a tactical adjustment, not a strategic shift. And I think that this is a tactical adjustment that you've also seen with other countries from Beijing, with Australia, with Japan, the United Kingdom right now, we are seeing sort of engagement with China again under the new government. So I think this is a tactical shift. And I don't think in India, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic about this process that has started. I don't want to prejudge it.
Sure.
But I see this as a tactical shift from China rather than something strategic, as a rebalancing of the relationship with India. If India wants a rebalanced relationship with China, it needs to develop greater national power across all domains. Until we do that, agreements on paper are good, but they need to be backed by capacity across all domains, including. So we will need to continue to do the internal and external balancing that we have been doing if we want to arrive at some sort of a new modus vivendi with China. Currently, what we have is a tactical shift. Let's hope that it works out, for the best. But I'm not necessarily being terribly critical, saying that this is something that we should not have done. But I'm not necessarily even saying that we've arrived at some new moment in the relationship.
Thank you very much, Manoj, for joining us, for participating in the show. Ambassador Fabian, if I can just come back to you, Prime Minister Modi did say India-China relations are important not just for each other, but for global peace. Is he punching way above his head? What is he talking about? I mean, what does that spell out in real terms? Because global peace is right now, there's a fire burning in the Middle East with Gaza and Palestine and Israel, and of course now Lebanon. And then you have, Ukraine, where apparently in the conversation the meeting that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin had, they did talk about Ukraine. So is this what Modi was hinting at?
I cannot say. But all that I would say is that if India and China, the two giants in Asia, if they have a cold, hostile relationship, well, that is not good, neither for them nor for the region and also for the world. Because together, if they work together, they can contribute so much, not only for the prosperity of their respective peoples, but also for the rest of the world.
Yeah. Welcome to the program, Nivedita Kapoor. She's the resident, she lives in Moscow, but is an expert on Russia. I'm very glad to have you on the program. Welcome. So,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Kapoor,
Yeah.
Ms. Kapoor, so the Russian president, by hosting BRICS at Tatarstan, which is 800 miles from the front line in Kyiv, was playing host to a large grouping because clearly he couldn't host this, he couldn't leave Russia and travel abroad because the last time he was supposed to be headed to BRICS in Johannesburg, there was an arrest warrant out for him. So, I mean, he was signaling, I suppose, by hosting 32 countries that he was not alone. And is there a sense then that, I mean, he wasn't just being the Russian president at Kazan, he was almost projecting himself as a global leader. Is that the sense that came across in Russia?
Uh, I think you are right in the sense that Russia has been trying to constantly present an image that it is not isolated. If you read the press, there is, especially the official state press, as well as the official statements, it's always repeated that despite the best efforts of the West, despite sanctions being imposed on Russia, Russia is today not isolated because, see, the Indian Prime Minister is here, the Chinese leader is here, as well as the BRICS has now expanded. The fact that a lot of other countries are applying for BRICS memberships, that is also presented in Russia as a point that shows not just the attractiveness of BRICS, but also the fact that these countries are willing to associate with Russia because Russia is, of course, an important member of BRICS. And at the same time, Russia now also recognizes the need to engage more and more with the East, with the global South. Despite the fact that Russia has been saying that it will pivot to the East for a very, very long time, it has actually only started doing that properly after its relations with the West started declining. And then this process really gathered pace after 2022, after the war began with Ukraine. So Russia does realize that due to the collapse of its relations with the West, it now needs the East more than ever. And because it is not in a traditionally strong position, it now has to build those links in a lot of ways. And BRICS and now the BRICS Plus or the BRICS outreach efforts together, they provide Russia a very good opportunity to do that.
This BRICS Plus actually is quite interesting because it's brought in Iran, it's brought in Egypt, it's brought in Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. So it's basically, it's oil-rich United Arab Emirates and the oil-rich Iran. So that's also interesting in that sense that, the widening circle of BRICS includes countries in the global south as well as in the Middle East.
Yes. The new composition is definitely very interesting. And there is, in fact, a lot of debate about this widening of the BRICS versus the deepening of the BRICS. Because despite the fact that these are energy-rich countries and these are developing countries, there's also the question of now that we have expanded BRICS, how do we make it an effective organization? Because if you look at why BRICS was established, if you read the 2009 joint statement, when it was just BRIC, the 4 countries, even at that time, the main aim was reform of the international financial structures, the Bretton Woods institutions, the reform of the WTO. And they said, we want to build a just and fair multipolar world order. This is in the 2009 statement. So now we are in 2024, we have an expanded BRICS. So how does now this organization work towards these goals? Because it has established the NDB, it has established the contingency reserve arrangement, but these are supposed to complement the existing structures. We are not trying to dismantle the existing structure. We are trying to reform this existing structure. If you look at the
and also the payments, the fact that India and the UAE came to a rupee agreement, and all the oil purchases that India has made from Russia is not paid in dollars. It's paid in the not in rupees, and definitely not yuan. So what is that that message going out is that Russia is also looking at itself as, I think it had its fingers burnt when its funds were frozen, bank accounts and funds were frozen, and that money was given to Ukraine, in fact. So I think Russia is trying to circumvent that in a sense. If I can just come to you, General Pannu, my question basically was that given the closeness, growing closeness between China and Russia, how does that impact India? Does India view that with suspicion? Can it encash that to its benefit? Was that what happened with the at Kazan vis-a-vis the China-India sort of thaw, so to speak, on the border?
I think one short answer is that China and Russia coming together is good for India. because traditionally we've had good diplomatic and historical relations with Russia. Having a view where goes counter towards the joint Russia-China, I think is very bad for India. So if we have to do any balancing act, then I think doing balancing act through Russia is better than uh, going around forging alliances which are anti-China and leaves Russia out.
That's interesting. Ambassador, if I can just bring you back to Prime Minister Modi. At Kazan, he did make another pitch for peace between Ukraine and Russia. And despite the last visit when he made to Kiev, which he made to Kiev, it didn't go down really well with Vladimir Zelensky. Is Modi again pitching to play mediator? I mean, he has Russia's trust, but he definitely doesn't have Ukraine's. And this is the third year since war started, and it doesn't look like Ukraine is making any progress at all. It seems to be bogged down while Russia seems to be making advances.
Well, it is true that Prime Minister Modi is doing his utmost to broker a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. But I am not very confident that it will go anywhere for a couple of reasons. One is that, if there are two parties, one party can start the war. But there can be a ceasefire only when both the parties want a ceasefire at the same time, which is not exactly the case now.
Yeah.
Point number two is that India is not the only state which is engaged in this exercise.
That's true. Turkey is too.
Yes, and China and Brazil too. And at one point, if I remember right, President Putin has specifically referred to Brazil's and China's plans. And please don't forget that India has come out with any specific plan. It is one thing to say this is not the era of war and all that, but no specific plan has come out. And I'm not saying we should have. No, this is not the time. Okay, but China did come out. And I think Brazil also. So if at all anything is to happen, as far as Russia is concerned, Russia will give full credit to China, Brazil, India, and perhaps to Turkey too.
Yeah,
It will not
absolutely.
be a mono act by India.
That's very interesting. Ms. Kapoor, would you like to comment on this? Because the conversation on Ukraine varies from who you hear it from. I mean, it depends on who you're talking to. So, what is it that you hear on the ground? Is Ukraine still going to be a factor that is pulling Russia down, or is Putin's Russia on top of the story?
See, in Russia, given how the media environment is structured and given the censorship rules, it's almost impossible for anyone to say that anything on Ukraine that will contradict the official line. So the only thing you will hear in Russia, at least, is 100% the official line that Russia. So the only narrative that you will hear is the fact that Russia is fighting this war for self-defense, that this is a result of American policies over the years, and that Russia is going to achieve victory, even though it doesn't define exactly what that victory means. So this is the official line, and everybody is going to absolutely repeat that. But if we look at the BRICS declaration, we only saw one point on Ukraine in the BRICS declaration, which simply noted the national positions of the countries, and that's it. In contrast, if you look at the issues of the Middle East, there were at least 3 to 4 points very critical of Israel. So it does feel like that BRICS does not have, obviously, a consensus on Ukraine. And Ukraine is an issue that Russia probably would not want a situation where it creates a rift within the BRICS. So states generally deal with these issues bilaterally. They don't want BRICS to become this platform which interferes in the affairs of its members. So I think that's the approach that BRICS has broadly followed on Ukraine. But there, of course, there's another part to it, because before this, we were talking about currency issues. So because the conflict and the war in Ukraine reflects on other issues, which is about sanctions, which have been condemned in the BRICS declarations. But there's also the fact that despite Russia wanting a BRICS currency, it wants a payment mechanism among the BRICS countries. All of this, the BRICS countries have not reached a conclusion. It's still in the discussion stage. The only thing that we have achieved is promotion of trade in national currencies. And even that is for bilateral trade with Russia. Dollar continues to dominate most of our cross-border transactions. The only currency where we have seen an increase in its use is yuan, and that's mostly on account of very high Russia-China trade. So the talk of de-dollarization and of BRICS currency, it's very clear that there's no consensus, and there's still a lot of ground that needs to be covered. And this also relates to the differences that are bilateral in nature. So does India want a situation where yuan gains more prominence over dollar? I don't think that's the case. So it's not as simple as the BRICS coming together and having a common currency. There are a lot of bilateral issues, and there are also infrastructure issues, financial infrastructure, and those issues have to be resolved before BRICS can come up with a solid plan.
You were saying that Russia basically, the BRICS basically wasn't able to put out an actual plan on de-dollarization, although it's been talked about greatly. Is it because it doesn't have the backing of all the countries, or is it because I've frozen again? Is it because it doesn't have the backing of all the countries, or is it because everybody doesn't want to go up against US, economic might, or is it a pet project of Russia and China alone?
As far as I understand, it's a practical issue. The fact that dollar is used very extensively in cross-border trade is because of the stability that it provides. The fact that dollar, a lot of our debt is pegged to the dollar. Our currency, a lot of the currencies are pegged to the dollar. It provides stability to the countries who are engaging in these transactions. Whether you look at rupee, whether you look at yuan, neither of these are fully convertible currencies. So they are not very attractive in terms of being used as a mechanism of cross-border settlements. So dollar has a very long-standing dominance. And if you look at the Indian perspective, if we are looking to move away from the dollars for whatever reasons, if you're worried about the possibility of sanctions in the future, or a country wants to improve its own, the standing of its own currency. But the fact is, because China is the new powerhouse, if the countries move away from the dollar, the logical choice then becomes yuan. And India might not want that situation. So especially for India, dollar remains important. And in general, because dollar is used so extensively, it's not easy to somehow displace it from its current position. So it's a matter of both the financial reasons as well as the practical.
Now that's very interesting. Because Russia is an economic basket case, really. And both South Africa and Brazil are struggling economies today. And there's talk about about why are these countries which which are economically so weak, even promoting an idea like de-dollarization. Ambassador, do you think that India stands to benefit with this kind of arrangement? I mean, do we need to even look at? I mean, rupee is paid for our imports, Russian oil imports, but it doesn't pay for anything else, does it? At the current moment, except for the UAE.
Thank you. I think we need to get things straight. First of all, there is no question of a BRICS common currency to materialize for the next foreseeable future. We know how long did it take the European Union to do that.
Yeah.
Right? You started in 1948, and it happened when I was in Rome in 2000. And that too, not all the EU members joined. Okay, so this common currency is, what shall I say, is chasing the mirage, and more important, nobody is chasing that mirage. The Western media occasionally put it out, that it is being planned and all that. No. In fact, Putin himself made it clear before the summit that it was not on the agenda. That's point.
Hmm.
Point number two, what Putin is trying to do, and as far as India is concerned, it is not that we want dollar to remain where it is, but we don't want dollar to be replaced by yuan.
Correct, correct.
See, what India wants is, more utilization of the national currencies for bilateral trade. And as you mentioned earlier, I believe with UAE, we are doing it now.
Yes.
So that is what we are doing, and that is mentioned in the communique that there should be more use of the national currencies. Now coming
So,
to the de-dollarization.
yeah,
De-dollarization is a different thing. It is not sort of doing away with dollar. It's just diminishing dollar's role. There, that SWIFT. When you send money,
yeah,
use the SWIFT. Now Russia has been banned from using it, and in the declaration it says that there will be a BRICS clear
yeah, yeah.
substitute for SWIFT. You know what I mean? So de-dollarization, some progress is being made, and of course you mentioned earlier that West has given Ukraine the money which Russian central bank had put in. Well,
That's right.
not the corpus. What they have done is with the interest gain. They are
Oh,
still scared of touching the corpus. Okay,
oh, that's very interesting, sir.
so
That is.
so that is what it is. And last point, you said that with Russia, but Russia is much worried about this, mounting rupee asset
It
that they
is?
have in India.
Okay.
And there is one way of handling it, but somehow, for some reasons, our RBI doesn't want to do it.
What is the way of handling it, sir?
Way of handling it is very simple. Let there be a bank established which will do business only with Russia.
Hmm.
Okay? So that bank doesn't have to be scared what America will do to it. Because it's doing only with Russia. And with Russia, there is so much of business. But that RBI doesn't want to do it because the Fed will be absolutely upset.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But before I come back to you, Ambassador, on India's balancing act between Russia and China and the United States, Jen Pannu, can you just give us a wrap up of what you expect to see happen vis-a-vis China before I conclude? In this day, there's so much talk about disengagement and whatever, the bringing the 50,000 troops that are on both sides of the LAC down. Would that actually happen? Disengagement, is it on the cards at all?
I'm not too sure whether whatever is being said pre-BRICS will have any impact on the ground situation, because it is a trust factor. And when there is a deficit, no soldier is going to be brought back for the other side to come and take advantage. And then, we will go back to reinventing the whole problem and again deconflicting to say that, we are on a back foot because we trusted them.
Hmm.
So I think this trust deficit is going to remain till the time the boundary question is sorted out, amicably between the two sides. And I don't see any reason why the boundary question is going to be permanently settled between the two sides, because I think there are larger strategic games which are at play. When you talk about the great game, I think the great game between India and China is to continue to keep India under pressure and extract everything diplomatically, everything in trade-wise, everything the way in the high table they have discussions, the UN and all that. So India should always be a younger and a weaker partner, uh,
Hmm.
and that is the only way that China can ensure it. So if everything is settled, then they'll have no reason to push us around. So they are not only doing it on the borders, but they are also showing military presence in the Indian Ocean.
That's right.
Their survey ships moving around. They're building facilities near Bangladesh or in Bangladesh and Pakistan, both sides. Bay of Bengal is no more Indian lake. Similarly, Arabian Sea is not where it is the Indian Navy which is going to be supreme, because the way Makran Coast is being militarized with the Chinese help. So as a result, I think it is not only land borders, it is also how they deal with the neighborhood. How strong or weak are we in relations within our own South Asia, as we call it. So I think it's a very, very big thing to say that we will have a future with China, which will be peaceful. I think Manoj had mentioned that unless a comprehensive national power goes up to a point that we have a very strong military, only then I think there is a hope that we will be able to settle. So we have to become equals first and then settle the boundary questions. In inequality, I don't think so there is any hope to settle the boundary.
That's very interesting. So, Ms. Kapoor, if you could just tell us, is Russia's ties with India, are they going to be strengthened in the days to come? Is it being done to rub the US's nose in the mud, or does it is it really being driven because it needs strong allies as its own clout diminishes? Or am I jumping to a conclusion that is not really possible on Russia diminishing its circle of interest and power?
No, as far as I understand, both India and Russia have been trying to build up their bilateral relationships for their own reasons. The fact that there was a huge gap between, since the war started, the Prime Minister had not visited Russia. But this time, after the elections, he chose Russia as the place for his first bilateral state visit. So that was clearly something that India had in mind, that we need to stabilize this relationship with Russia. Russia does remain a very important defense supplier to our country. If you read the Ministry of Defense press reviews in the past year, the year-end reviews, it does clearly point out that some of the spare parts were not received. There was a delay. There has been a delay in receiving. The S-400s, our frigates have been delayed. So clearly, India does have a reason to push Russia on those issues. When the Prime Minister came here, there was another huge issue of the Indians who have been sort of duped into serving in the Russian army. So we needed to address those concerns as well. Russia now is a big supplier of oil to India. But the fact, as you were talking about this issue of trade deficit, so how does India increase its exports? Because one of the ways to address the trade deficit is India increase its exports. So all of these issues are rather important for the India-Russia relationship. And there's also the broader geopolitical program in mind. It's not just that India wants to somehow send a message to the United States. I do not think it's about that, because India is pursuing clearly a very important balancing act. And one cannot diminish the importance of the relations with the United States today. But the fact that, because we're talking about the Russia-China relationship, we have seen that relationship reach new heights. And I don't think India would be in a very pretty position if Russia and China continue to come closer. So we need to give Russia the option as well, that so that China is not the only partner that it sees at the world stage. And I think Russia also understands that importance, because as I said, after the break of relations with the West, it needs the East. And it does not want a situation where China is the only major power that is its key, that's a strategic partner. Russia also wants a diversified set of ties. And I think if Russia is thinking that way, then relationship with India becomes important. So yes, Russia would be very happy if India and China had a good relationship, but that's not something that Russia can define. But what Russia can do is make sure that it maintains a neutral attitude in any India-China dispute, and it does not do anything that will hurt Indian interests. And if Russia can prove that to India, then I think India would also be interested in maintaining the relationship with Russia. So I don't think this is a question of telling anything to the United States or anything. It's purely based on national interest. And I think it looks like India and Russia have decided that we want to maintain at least stable ties, at least at the moment, given how unstable the world is, and also given the fact that India is not the strongest player in Eurasia. So we don't also want to lose Russia in Eurasia because we also need partners in that domain.
That's a very interesting point. Ambassador, if you could give us your concluding remarks. Do you see the relationship with Russia getting stronger and China dominating the, Asian, the dominatrix, so to speak?
Thank you. Let me put it this way. The West has been calling Russia the junior partner with China. Well, I personally think they are getting it wrong. President Biden has simultaneously pursued a policy of confrontation both with China and Russia, and if they have got closer to each other, well, there is no wonder. So we have to recognize there is a deep nexus between Russia and China. And if you go back in history, when the Soviet Union collapsed, 1991 or about, China and Russia got closer.
That's right.
Okay, so that deep nexus is going to continue. I'm looking at the big picture geopolitically. Now, Iran has more or less joined it. Why? Because President Biden failed to carry out the promise he had given as a candidate that he would resume the nuclear treaty with Iran.
Yes, correct.
And of course, North Korea is certainly a part of it. Okay. Now, coming to India-Russia relations, Russia has been a trusted friend, time-tested friend. You know, the liberation of Bangladesh would not have happened the way it did, but for,
Absolutely, yeah.
And as Foreign Minister Jaishankar said the other day, Russia has not done anything to hurt us. You see, so that will continue. But at the same time, as already pointed out, United States is important. But, Indian diplomacy is capable of doing that, what shall I say, dancing with more than one partner at a time.
Thank you, Ambassador Fabian. It was a very interesting insight into the great dance, I suppose you can call it. Thank you, General Pannu. Thank you, Nivedita Kapoor. Very interesting interacting with you and listening to you on Russia and the way it ticks. And thank you, Manoj Kewalramani, for participating in the show and giving us your insights into the largely inscrutable China. Thank you, viewers. Do click on the New Indian Express and watch Global Express.